that? 1891. Now, just for purposes, I have a theory of history. I hate dates. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just giving it just so you can place it. Just know that in that general period, utility as an industry really came about. And the second thing is, as a union, you were born then. This is your period of birth. Now, the fourth thing that happened is the electric light bulb. In 1879, the electric light bulb came about. You'll see that this morning or this afternoon. Now, remember what they said yesterday. We lighted houses up first and factories were last. And there was a 30-year time lapse. The last thing that was important is Commonwealth Edison was founded in 1907, the first big power company, and then ensued over time struggles between the future-born union of yours and Commonwealth Edison in its various locations. So the confrontation and the give and take of an adversarial world was now being set up for you. Now, let's take a look at some of the effects, and I'd like you to go over a page, the effects in more detail of what happened here. Why did all of these things crash down on us? Well, the first thing, and I've also put information boxes here for each one of these, one way or the other. The first thing is that when I look at a union could not control skill levels required for industrial processes. Why? Because I now had management. Management had time study engineers. Management, in effect, created lines. Management decided how many parts went down that line. They decided how many people would man that line. And they decided what skills they needed, and mostly they didn't. They just needed somebody to do something. Skill itself was no longer vital. Now, do I still have Mike over here? And in the factory, yes. And does he still have skill? Yes. Does he practice it? Yes. But not in that sense anymore, not in a pure sense anymore. Okay, we know that the union could no longer control the skill levels required for an industrial process. The next thing that went was apprenticeship control. And as in my box I indicated, the union controlled the apprenticeship. Well, over time, it shifted from the union to a combination of union and management. And why? Because it didn't need as many skills. And what's happened to the pure skills inside of many non-union factories? They abandoned the traditional apprenticeship programs. They shortened them up. They cheapened them up. And they created a technician. Now, we started calling them that eventually, but what they did is they cheapened the apprenticeships in many ways. And as a consequence, there was now a dual control. But then a third control came on during this period, and that's with the Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training, U.S. government function. So apprenticeships now have union management and government oversight and control and involvement in it. So the pure sense of apprenticeship really has lost its effectiveness. The loss of a union tradition. So move over a page. Now, many of the workers that, as we went into factories that were recruited, and you ask about the mining industry and the housing and all of that, were generally people that came from Eastern Europe. So if I named the countries of Poland, all the things that were in the old former Soviet bloc of the Eastern bloc of the Soviet Union, from Czechoslovakia to its Yugoslavia, and its 5 nations, there are 6 nations now, Albania. Those are the people, and what happened is that industry went there and recruited them. At one time, the Ford Rouge plant, there were 125 languages spoken at Ford Rouge. Now, if you're a UAW, an aspiring early UAW, who spoke one language called English, how in the hell do you organize 10,000 people who spoke 125 languages, and the only people that spoke some of those languages, very frankly, were the supervisors, and they were management. And as a result of all that, we lacked a union tradition. The word union to people from Eastern Europe had a socialist, I don't want to use communist because a socialist and a word called syndicalist. And what these were people that did not believe in collective bargaining. They believed in, and they were the forerunners of our folks here, our unions, they believed in controlling the means of production. The other problem that we had was, and I'll do one and then we're going to stop and take a little break, was this whole thing about a living wage. In my learning box I said, at least when people came here from Eastern Europe versus what they had there was good money in relationship to the learning time invested. Okay. Now, good money compared to what they were used to. And as a result of all of that, in effect, it was hard to organize people, let alone 125 languages I had to cut through. The money that was offered by Henry Ford, as I just use Henry, pick on him, that was offered by Henry Ford was a lot of money compared to what they had come from. They were in abject poverty. And somebody gave them an opportunity to come to this land. Little did they know they were coming here as indentured servants, holding to the company's store. So, but in relationship, that made it hard for a traditional trade unions that were being born here in that environment of the factory to get a grip on it. Okay, we also started to have employer opposition because we had an employer. When I think about it, I want to think about this whole thing. How did this opposition show itself? They formed the first personnel departments. We now affectionately call it human resources. And I teach in that program, and he's in that program to get his master's in it. But in the 1930s, the personnel department at Ford employed somebody named Harry Bennett. Harry Bennett was a mobster. Harry Bennett had thugs that were his reps. They carried Thompson submachine guns. They beat Walter Reuther and his brother damn near to death right south of here at the Rouge plant at the Battle of the Overpass, which was the overpass of the parking lot to the plant, when Walter and his brother were talking to workers about exercising their rights to be in a union. That wasn't long ago. To now, a Ford Motor Company that has one of the more modern relationships with the auto workers. Read your paper this morning. God, we've come a mile. But what did we have to shed? How much did we have to lose to get that mile? Were there other choices? And Bill was making that point, I believe. There are other choices if we'd pursue them. But they only last so long. They only last as long as the people who made that choice stay there. And then we start over again. So remember Harry Bennett, remember his machine guns, and remember the Rouge plant. That's where it all happened. 5-6 miles south of here. Let's flip a page. Craft unions were not interested in organizing the factory system. Now, you'll notice that I put in my information box, there are 3 federations of labor in American history. There's a 4th now, but I'll talk about that later. What is a labor federation? A labor federation is not something that negotiates. It was a creation of mass production. And the bottom line is, as workers lost their power of the craft and the skill, and employers became opposers, it became apparent that unions needed laws and politicians and courts and judges who were favorably inclined to protect their interests. It meant that we had to have contracts, and contracts had to be enforced. And that meant we had to become political. And how did we do that? Federations are simply the political arm at every level of government in America to talk to and to support the political efforts of labor. That's what they are. The very first one of those was the Knights of Labor. I'll come back to that, but just suffice it to say that it was too much at once and eventually failed. But I'll talk about why it did. Now, please understand why you were born as utility workers. The then, which became the AFL of the AFL-CIO, the AFL, which was the skilled portion of the union movement. The CIO was basically the masses of workers, the mass production workers of the future. The AFL piece of it, now they weren't present yet, did not want to organize or did not want unskilled people in their craft unions. And for that point, for 50 years, they refused to organize workers in mass production. That is why you were born, because then people formed the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, as a labor federation for mass production workers, the workers that were being generated in this new economy. Your union was a part of that. Your craft opposer was the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They were the other side of this argument. It's ironic how the two all of a sudden moved in a similar and same direction over time. But that was the difference. And it manifested itself in such a way that in this country we had two UAWs, we had two steelworkers, we had two everything. One was an AFL, one was a CIO. And over time they became one. I'm talking about individual unions. There were some unions. One was called the Mechanics Society of America. It was a skilled craftsman. Was the last dying union that was pure skill in an auto plant. And they were down in Toledo in the Jeep plant. I mediated the labor disputes. Those people lived in a different world. They were fun for me, because I love history, they were fun to deal with. The only place they were in Toledo. They were the most skilled machinists that Jeep employed, or Chrysler at that time, in that auto plant. It's the only place in the whole entire industry, of the history of American auto industry, they ever recognized a skill. They absolutely refused arbitration. They would not have arbitration in their agreement. They would fight to the death over it. What was the compromise? They liked me, and so, and Chrysler didn't want to take a strike, and they were prepared to do it, and I said, well, look, let's not call it arbitration, let's call it mediation, because that's non-binding, and I'll make the final decision for you guys. And they said, okay, and that's what we did for 15 years when I was stationed as a mediator in Toledo. And eventually after that, the Jeep plant died, and they died, and they're no longer in existence. So it took a long time for that to sift through the system.